Do you ever wake up and quietly wonder, is it too late for me? Too late to start again? Too late to feel excited? Too late to matter? If that thought has ever crossed your mind, then stay with me, because this story might change the way you see your life starting today. There was a man named Robert. He was 67 years old, a retired mechanic, a quiet man, the kind of man who spent most of his life working hard, raising a family, and doing what was expected of him. For over 40 years, he woke up before sunrise, fixed engines, came home tired, ate dinner, and went to bed. Day after day, year after year, and then one day, it all stopped. Retirement. At first, it sounded peaceful. No alarms, no deadlines, no greasy hands, just rest. That's what everyone told him. You've earned it, Robert. Now just relax. But no one told him what comes after the silence. The first few weeks felt like a vacation. He slept in, watched television, drank his coffee slowly. But then, something began to feel different. The days started to feel longer, too long. The house became quieter than he had ever noticed before. His children had their own lives. His wife, Susan, had her routines. And Robert, he just sat there. One morning, he looked at himself in the mirror, really looked. And for the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because he looked older, but because he felt empty. He whispered to himself, "What now?" And that question stayed with him. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And slowly, without realizing it, Robert began to shrink inside his own life. He stopped calling friends. He stopped going out. He stopped trying. He told himself, this is what getting old is. This is how it ends. But deep down, something didn't agree. One evening, while sitting alone on the porch, he noticed something simple. A little boy across the street, learning how to ride a bicycle. The boy fell, got up, fell again, got up again. No fear, no hesitation, just determination. Robert watched closely. The boy's father stood nearby, not holding him, just watching, letting him try. And then it happened. The boy rode, just for a few seconds. But he did it. And the look on his face, pure joy, pure victory. Robert felt something move inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not regret, something else, possibility. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that moment, about how that little boy didn't ask, "Am I too young?" Or, "What if I fail?" He just tried. And suddenly, Robert had a thought that surprised him. What if I'm not done yet? The next morning, instead of sitting with his coffee like usual, he did something different. He walked. Not far, just around the block. But it was something. His legs felt stiff. His breath was heavier than he remembered. But he kept going, step by step. And with every step, something inside him started to wake up. It wasn't about exercise. It was about movement, about choice, about deciding that maybe, just maybe, life wasn't over. Over the next few days, he kept walking. The same block, the same slow pace. But something changed. He started noticing things. The sound of birds, the warmth of the sun, the smell of fresh grass. Things that had always been there, but he had never really seen. One day he walked a little further, then a little more. And then something unexpected happened. He smiled. For no reason. Just smiled. That small change began to grow. He started waking up with a little more energy, a little more curiosity. He began asking himself questions he hadn't asked in decades. What do I enjoy? What have I always wanted to try? At first, the answers didn't come easily. When you've spent a lifetime doing what you have to do, it's hard to remember what you want to do. But he didn't stop asking. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old drawer, he found something. A small notebook, dusty, worn out. He opened it slowly. Inside were sketches, old drawings of cars, designs, ideas. His handwriting from years ago, before life got busy, before responsibilities took over. Robert stared at those pages for a long time. He remembered. He used to love drawing, designing, imagining. But somewhere along the way, he stopped. Not because he couldn't, but because he believed he shouldn't. He closed the notebook, then opened it again. And in that quiet moment, sitting alone in his living room, he made a decision. A small one, but powerful. I'm going to try again. The next day, he went to a local store and bought a simple sketch pad and a pencil. Nothing fancy, just a start. That evening, he sat down at the table, blank page in front of him. His hand trembled slightly, not because he was weak, but because he was afraid. Afraid that he had lost it. Afraid that he was too old. Afraid that it wouldn't matter. He stared at that blank page for a long time. Then finally, he made the first line. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it was messy, but it was real. He kept going, line after line, mistake after mistake, and something amazing happened. He didn't stop. Hours passed. And for the first time in years, he forgot about time. He was present, fully present. When he finally looked up, it was late at night. His back hurt. His eyes were tired. But his heart? Alive. That night, he slept deeply, not because he was exhausted, but because he felt something again. Purpose. Over the next few weeks, Robert kept drawing. Every day. Some days were frustrating. Some days he doubted himself. He would look at his work and think, this isn't good enough. But then he would remember that little boy on the bicycle, falling, getting up, trying again. And so he kept going. Slowly, his confidence started to return, not all at once, but piece by piece, like rebuilding something that had been forgotten. One afternoon, Susan walked into the room and saw his drawing spread across the table. She paused, looked at him, and said something simple. I didn't know you still did this. Robert smiled gently. I didn't either. That moment meant more than he expected, because for the first time, someone else saw what he was becoming. Not just who he used to be, but who he was now, and who he could still become. What started as a small step, a simple walk, a single pencil line, was slowly turning into something bigger. Not success, not recognition, something more important. A new beginning. And here's the truth. Robert didn't suddenly become a different person. He didn't become younger. He didn't erase his past. He simply made a choice to start. To believe that life, no matter your age, still has room for something new. If you're watching this right now and you feel like your time has passed, I want you to think about this. What if it hasn't? What if the story isn't over? What if this moment, right now, is not the end, but the beginning of something you haven't even imagined yet? You don't need a big plan. You don't need perfect conditions. You just need one step, one decision, one small action. Because a fresh start doesn't come from age. It comes from courage. And courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you move forward anyway. If this story speaks to you, if it reminds you of something inside yourself, take that first step. And before you go, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind you life is never truly over. It's just waiting for you to begin again. The next morning, Robert woke up earlier than usual, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. There was a quiet excitement in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't loud, it wasn't overwhelming, but it was there. Steady, real. He made his coffee, sat by the window, and looked outside. The same street, the same houses, the same world. But somehow, it didn't feel the same anymore. Because he wasn't the same. He finished his coffee, walked to the table, and opened his sketch pad again. This time, his hand didn't shake as much. This time, he didn't stare at the blank page for long. He just started. Line after line, curve after curve. Slowly, patiently, something began to take shape. It wasn't perfect. It still had flaws, but it had something far more important. Effort. And with every drawing, Robert began to notice something. He wasn't thinking about his age. He wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was focused on what he was doing right now. And that changed everything. Days passed, then weeks, Drawing became a part of his routine, just like his morning coffee, just like his evening walk. It gave his day structure. It gave his mind something to hold on to. But more than that, it gave him a reason to wake up. One afternoon, while sitting on a bench during his walk, Robert noticed a small community center nearby. A simple building, nothing special. A faded sign out front. He had walked past it many times before, but never really paid attention. This time, he stopped. There was a board outside with a few flyers pinned to it. Most of them were about small events, yoga classes, book clubs, local meetups, and then one flyer caught his eye. Beginner art class. All ages welcome. Robert stared at it. For a moment, his mind filled with doubt. I'm too old for this. I don't belong there. What if I'm the worst one in the room? The thoughts came quickly, loud, familiar. But this time, something was different. He didn't walk away immediately. He stood there, reading the flyer again. All ages welcome. He took a deep breath and quietly said to himself, maybe that includes me. That evening, he mentioned it to Susan. There's an art class at the community center, he said, trying to sound casual. She looked at him, surprised. You should go, she said without hesitation. Robert nodded slowly, but inside, the fear was still there. That night, he barely slept. Not because he didn't want to go, but because he did. And sometimes, wanting something again after a long time can be just as scary as failing. The next day, he stood outside the community center, looking at the door. People walked in and out, some young, some older, some laughing, some quiet. Normal people, just like him. His heart beat faster. He almost turned around, almost told himself, not today, maybe next time. But then he remembered something. That little boy on the bicycle, falling, getting up, trying again. Robert took a deep breath and walked in. The room was simple. A few tables, chairs, art supplies scattered around. About 10 people sat inside, some chatting, some already drawing. The instructor, a kind woman with a warm smile, looked up. First time? She asked gently. Robert nodded. Welcome, she said. Find a seat anywhere. That was it. No judgment. No pressure. Just welcome. He sat down quietly, picked up a pencil. For the first few minutes he felt out of place, like he didn't belong, like everyone else knew more than him. But then, as the class began, something shifted. The instructor spoke simply, clearly, step by step. Start with basic shapes, she said. Don't worry about perfection. Robert listened carefully. He followed along. And slowly, he realized something surprising. He could do this. Not perfectly, not better than others, but enough. Enough to continue. As the class went on, he glanced around the room. There was a young woman struggling with her lines, an older man erasing again and again, a teenager looking frustrated. Everyone was learning. Everyone was trying. And for the first time, Robert understood something deeply. He wasn't behind. He was just beginning. When the class ended, the instructor walked around, looking at everyone's work. She stopped at Robert's table, looked at his drawing, and smiled. You have a good eye, she said. Robert blinked, surprised. Really? He asked. She nodded. Yes. Just keep going. Just keep going. Simple words. But they stayed with him. That night, as he walked home, something inside him felt lighter. Not because he had mastered anything, but because he had shown up, because he had tried, because he had stepped outside the small world he had built around himself, and realized there was still so much more out there. Over the next few weeks, Robert kept attending the class. Every session, he learned something new: shading, perspective, detail. Some days were good, some days were frustrating. There were moments when his drawings didn't turn out the way he wanted. Moments when he compared himself to others. Moments when that old voice came back. You're too late. You're not good enough. But now, he had a different voice too. Quieter, but stronger. Keep going. And he listened to that one. One evening after class, a fellow student named Mark sat beside him. You're improving fast, Mark said. Robert smiled slightly. I'm just trying not to quit, he replied. Mark laughed. That's the whole secret, he said. And maybe He was right. Because success isn't always about talent, or speed, or perfection. Sometimes, it's just about staying, about showing up again and again. Even when it's hard, even when you doubt yourself, even when no one is watching. Robert began to notice changes in other parts of his life too. He started talking more, listening more, laughing more. Even small things, like walking into a store or greeting a neighbor, felt easier. Because his world was expanding again. He wasn't just existing anymore. He was participating. One afternoon, while organizing his drawings at home, Susan sat beside him. "These are really good," she said softly. Robert looked at the pages. Each one different. Each one a step forward. "I'm still learning," he replied. Susan smiled. "Aren't we all?" she said. That sentence stayed with him. Because it was true. No matter your age, no matter your past, no matter how long you've been standing still, you can still learn. You can still grow. You can still begin again. And maybe that's what Robert was finally understanding. Life doesn't stop giving you chances. We just stop taking them. But the moment you decide to try again, to step forward, to risk being uncomfortable, everything begins to change. Not all at once, not magically, but steadily, quietly, powerfully. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe this is your moment too. Maybe there's something you've been putting off, something you've been telling yourself is too late. What if it's not? What if the only thing standing between you and a new beginning is one decision? To show up, totri, to keep going. Because the truth is, it's not about how fast you move. It's not about how perfect you are. It's about whether you're willing to take that next step, even when it's uncertain. Robert didn't have all the answers. He still had doubts. He still had fears. But he was no longer stuck. He was moving. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. The weeks turned into months. And something quiet but powerful continued to grow inside Robert. Not excitement. Not pride. Something deeper. Belief? Not the loud kind that shouts, "I can do anything," but the calm, steady kind that whispers, "I can keep going." His days had changed now. He still woke up early, still made his coffee, still sat by the window. But now, there was always something waiting for him. A reason. A direction. After breakfast, he would sit at the table, open his sketch pad, and begin. Some mornings the ideas came easily. Other mornings, he struggled. There were days when nothing looked right, days when every line felt wrong, days when frustration built up inside him. And on those days, the old thoughts tried to return. "You're wasting your time. This doesn't matter. You should just stop." Those voices were familiar, comfortable even, because he had listened to them for years. But now, he had something stronger. Experience. He had already seen what happens when you stop trying. He had already lived through that quiet emptiness. And he knew he didn't want to go back there. So even on the hard days, he stayed. Sometimes he didn't draw anything good. Sometimes he just sat there, holding the pencil. But he didn't quit. And slowly, that consistency began to shape him more than the drawings ever could. One afternoon at the community center, the instructor made an announcement. "Next month, we're hosting a small local art showcase," she said. "Anyone who wants to participate can submit their work." The room filled with quiet murmurs. Some people looked excited, others looked nervous. Robert felt both. His first instinct was to pull back. "This isn't for me," he thought. "I'm still a beginner." He kept his head down, pretending not to think about it. But the idea stayed with him. All day, all night, the thought of showing his work to others made his chest tighten. What if they don't like it? What if I embarrass myself? What if I'm not ready? But then, another question appeared. What if I am? That question felt different, uncomfortable, but honest. The next time he attended class, he noticed something. Other people were signing up, not just the best artists, not just the confident ones, regular people, people who were still learning, people who made mistakes, just like him. And suddenly, the fear didn't disappear, but it changed. It became something else, a challenge. At the end of the class, Robert stayed back. The instructor noticed. "Something on your mind," she asked. He hesitated, then spoke quietly. I was thinking about the showcase, but I'm not sure if I should. She looked at him for a moment, then said something simple. Why did you start drawing again? Robert paused. He hadn't expected that question. I wanted to feel something again, he said slowly. I wanted to try. She nodded. Then this is just another step, she said, not a test, not a judgment, just a step. Robert stood there in silence. Another step, not a final destination, not a moment that defines everything, just part of the journey. That changed how he saw it. That evening, he went home, sat at his table, and spread out his drawings. Page after page. Some rough, some better, some he liked, some he didn't. He studied them carefully, not as a critic, but as someone who was learning. And then, slowly, he selected a few. Not the perfect ones, but the honest ones. The ones that showed effort. The ones that told a story. The ones that represented him. The next day, he submitted his work. As he handed over the drawings, his hands felt slightly cold. His heart beat faster, but when it was done, he felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because he was confident, but because he had faced the fear and moved forward anyway. The days leading up to the showcase felt different. There was anticipation. There was doubt. There was curiosity. Robert continued his routine. He kept drawing, kept walking, kept showing up. But in the back of his mind, that event waited. Finally, the day arrived. The community center looked different, brighter, busier, filled with people. Paintings lined the walls, drawings displayed on tables. Conversations filled the air. Robert stood outside for a moment, taking it all in. He could feel the nerves rising again. That voice whispered, "You don't belong here." But this time, he didn't listen, because he knew something now. Belonging doesn't come from being the best. It comes from being present. He walked in, slowly, carefully, looking around. People moved from one piece to another. Some stopped to admire, some kept walking, some discussed what they saw. Robert's eyes searched the room until he found it. His work, displayed, simple, quiet. But there, he stood a few steps away, watching, waiting. At first, no one stopped. A few people walked past. Some glanced quickly, and for a moment, that old feeling returned. Disappointment, doubt. But he stayed. He didn't walk away. And then, someone stopped. A woman stood in front of his drawing. She leaned in slightly, looked closely, and stayed. A few seconds passed. Then she called someone over. They both looked, pointed at something, talked quietly. Robert couldn't hear what they were saying, but he didn't need to, because in that moment, something shifted inside him. It wasn't about approval. It wasn't about praise. It was about connection. Something he created made someone stop, made someone look, made someone feel something. And that was enough. More people came. Some paused. Some didn't. Some smiled. Some moved on. But each small moment added up. Each glance, each second of attention, each quiet acknowledgement. And Robert realized something powerful. Success doesn't always look like applause. Sometimes it looks like a single person stopping and noticing. Later that evening, the instructor approached him. "I'm glad you participated," she said. Robert nodded. "I almost didn't," he admitted. She smiled. "That's usually where the real growth happens," she replied. As the event came to an end, Robert stepped outside. The air felt cool, fresh. He took a deep breath, and for a moment, he just stood there, thinking, not about what others thought, not about whether he was good enough, but about how far he had come. From sitting alone in silence to standing in a room full of people, sharing something he created. From feeling empty to feeling alive. And it didn't happen overnight. It didn't come from one big decision. It came from many small ones. On a walk, one drawing, one class, one step at a time. That's how change really happens. Quietly, slowly, but powerfully. Robert wasn't a different person. He was still learning, still growing, still unsure at times, but he was no longer afraid to begin. And maybe that was the biggest victory of all. Because the moment you stop fearing the beginning, you open the door to everything that comes after. That night, after the showcase, Robert didn't rush home. He walked, slowly, calmly, with no destination in mind. The streets were quiet. The air was cool. Streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. For the first time in a very long time, he wasn't thinking about what was missing in his life. He was thinking about what was possible. He stopped for a moment, looking up at the sky. And in that silence, a simple thought came to him. This is not the end of my story. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was certain. And that certainty changed everything. The next morning, Robert woke up just like he always did. Same room, same window, same routine. But something inside him had shifted permanently. He no longer saw his days as something to get through. He saw them as something to use, to shape, to experience, to live. He sat at the table with his sketch pad. But this time, he didn't start drawing immediately. He just looked at his hands for a moment. Hands that had worked for decades. Hands that had built, fixed, carried, and provided. Hands that he once believed were done creating anything new. He smiled quietly. Then he picked up the pencil and began again. But this time, it wasn't just about drawing. It was about expression, about growth, about continuing. Days passed, and something interesting began to happen. Opportunities started to appear. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because Robert did. At the community center, people began recognizing him. Hey, you're the one who made that drawing at the showcase, right? Simple words, but meaningful. Conversations started. Connections formed. One day, the instructor approached him with a small suggestion. We're thinking of starting a beginner group for new members, she said. Would you be open to helping them get started? Robert was surprised. Me? He asked. She nodded. You understand what it feels like to begin again, she said. That matters more than being perfect. Robert didn't answer right away. The old fear came back for a moment. What if I'm not good enough to guide others? But then he remembered his own journey. He remembered how it felt to walk into that room for the first time. The uncertainty, the hesitation, the quiet hope. And he realized something important. Sometimes people don't need an expert. They need someone who understands. So he said yes. The first day he stood in front of that small group, he felt nervous. His voice wasn't strong. His hands weren't steady, but his intention was clear. He looked at them and saw himself. At different stages, different fears, different stories. And he spoke simply. I'm not here because I'm the best, he said. I'm here because I didn't quit. The room was quiet, but something connected. As the days went on, Robert found a new kind of fulfillment, helping others take their first step, watching someone go from doubt to effort, from effort to confidence, from confidence to belief. And in those moments, he realized something deeper than ever before. A fresh start isn't just about changing your own life. It's about creating something that can touch others too, something that continues beyond you. One evening, after a session, a man from the group approached him. He looked nervous, unsure. I almost didn't come today, the man admitted. I kept thinking I was too late to start. Robert smiled gently. I thought the same thing, he replied. The man looked at him. So what changed? He asked. Robert paused for a moment, then answered honestly. I stopped asking if it was too late and started asking if I was willing. The man nodded slowly, and in that moment, another beginning was set in motion. That's how it happens. Not in big dramatic moments, but in small decisions, quiet shifts, simple choices. Again and again, Robert's life didn't become perfect. He still had days where he felt tired, days where doubt tried to return, days where things didn't go as planned. But now, those days didn't define him, because he had learned something stronger than motivation. He had learned resilience, the ability to continue even when it's hard, the ability to start again, even after stopping, the ability to believe, even when it's uncertain. And maybe that's the real message of this story. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about reconnecting with the part of you that never disappeared. The part that still wants to try, still wants to grow, still wants to live fully. No matter your age, no matter your past, no matter how many years you think you've lost, you still have today. And today is enough to begin. Because a fresh start doesn't come from time. It comes from decision, from courage, from one small step forward. So if you're listening to this right now, if there's a part of you that feels like it's too late, I want you to remember Robert, a man who believed his story was over until he chose to turn the page. You don't need everything figured out. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to be willing to try, willing to move, willing to begin. Because the moment you do, life meets you there. And slowly, step by step, everything starts to change. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own life, take that feeling seriously. Don't ignore it. Don't push it away. Act on it. And before you leave, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who might need a fresh start, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind you of what's still possible. Your story isn't finished. In many ways, it's just getting started.